She fed a stranger with her last dollar, not knowing he'd be the CEO at her job interview. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. The rain fell in sheets over the city, turning sidewalks slick and shining under the glow of streetlights. Riley Morgan pulled her thin coat tighter, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She kept her head down, boots splashing through puddles, trying to ignore the ache in her stomach and the weight of her empty wallet. Around her, people hurried past with umbrellas. Taxis sent up rooster tails of dirty water, and horns blared at clogged intersections. She was used to being invisible in crowds, just another struggling face in a city that didn't care. Up ahead, a man slipped on the wet pavement. It was sudden, a startled shout, papers flying, a brown bag splitting open to spill a sad-looking sandwich into a puddle. He hit the ground hard, wincing as he tried to scramble up, his neat coat soaked through. Riley didn't think twice. She darted forward, nearly losing her footing, and reached for his arm. "Easy. Careful," she said, steadying him. He blinked at her through the rain, momentarily dazed. He was well-dressed, clearly not used to lying in the gutter. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and frustration twisted his face. "Thank you," he managed, brushing himself off, trying to salvage the ruined papers and the soggy mess of his lunch. Riley glanced at the wreckage. Her heart twisted. She knew what it was to have everything go wrong in a single moment. "Here," she said. She dug in her pocket, pulling out a single crumpled dollar bill, her last. She looked at it, hesitated only a second, then pressed it into his hand. "Go get a new sandwich. The deli's right there." He frowned in confusion. "Wait. No, you don't have to." But she was already turning away, pulling her hood up against the relentless rain. "Hey, hold on," he called after her, but his voice was drowned in the roar of passing traffic. Riley didn't look back. She felt the cold bite of wet fabric against her skin, but there was something warm in her chest, too, a tiny flicker of satisfaction at helping someone worse off, if only for a moment. Behind her, the man, Ethan Vale, stood frozen, clutching the crumpled dollar like it was something precious. The rain plastered his expensive coat to his frame, making him look oddly small and human in the sea of rushing umbrellas. He watched her disappear into the blur of gray, swallowed by the city, and felt a strange unease. He'd come to think of himself as someone who had everything under control, a man with power, wealth, and influence. But in that moment, on the soaked sidewalk, he realized he hadn't even managed to thank her properly. The rain fell harder, washing away the debris of the ruined lunch. Ethan shook his head, pocketed the damp dollar, and finally turned toward the deli she'd pointed out. The narrator's voice cuts in softly, like a quiet truth buried under the storm. Two strangers in the rain. No promises exchanged. No names remembered. But sometimes the smallest acts plant the seeds of something that can change everything. As the scene fades, the city is left glistening in the rain, the camera lingering on the empty sidewalk where Riley had stood, hinting at the invisible lines already drawing two very different lives toward an inevitable crossing. Riley stood frozen before the towering glass doors of Vale Corp., heart pounding against her ribs. She drew in a shaky breath and ran a hand over her worn-out blazer, trying to smooth the creases that refused to lie flat. Around her, professionals in tailored suits brushed past without a glance, badges gleaming, voices clipped and confident. She felt like an imposter among them, but she forced her feet to move. Inside, the lobby was all polished marble and quiet authority. A receptionist with a practiced smile directed her to the elevators. Riley's reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale and brittle, eyes dark from sleepless nights spent worrying about this moment. She stepped into the interview room, blinking at the sudden brightness. 3 people sat behind a sleek table, 2 HR managers with polite, guarded expressions, and a hiring director, who gave her a nod that felt more like a test than a greeting. She sat down, her hands knotted in her lap. Questions started briskly. Work history? She answered evenly, voice steady, highlighting her organizational skills and past responsibilities. Strengths? She described her reliability and willingness to learn. Weaknesses? A tiny pause, then an honest confession about needing to trust herself more. Then the director's eyes sharpened as he flipped a page in her file. His voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Explain the fraud conviction. Silence seemed to roar in her ears. Her mouth went dry. For an instant she thought of lying, brushing it off as a mistake, minimizing it. But she couldn't do it. Not after everything. She swallowed hard. I stole from my employer, she said, each word deliberate. It was 2 years ago. I was desperate. Rent was overdue, my mother was sick, and I made the worst choice of my life. I was arrested, convicted, and I served my time. I know saying sorry doesn't change what I did, but I've never stopped meaning it. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. Since then, I've worked whatever jobs I could get. I want a chance to prove I'm not that person anymore. One HR manager shifted uncomfortably. The other just nodded, scribbling a note. The director's expression was unreadable, eyes flat and professional. What Riley didn't see was the narrow window at the side of the room, behind reflective glass. Ethan Vale watched from there, arms folded. The same man she'd helped in the rain. He didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was pinned up, her clothes formal but ill-fitting, the vulnerability raw. He listened to her voice tremble as she laid herself bare, and something in him twisted. But in the interview room, no one spoke. Riley felt her pulse thud in her temples. When they finally said, "Thank you, we'll be in touch," she heard the dismissal in it. She forced a nod, gathered her folder with shaking hands, and walked out without meeting their eyes. Outside, she barely noticed the lobby's shine or the view of the skyline. She just pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. She had no money left for bus fare, but that was the least of her worries. She exhaled shakily, blinking back the sting in her eyes. The narrator's voice returns, quiet but certain. She walked out convinced she'd blown her only chance. But sometimes the truth sows seeds in places we can't see. Even in the coldest rooms, someone might be listening. The city had quieted to a hush by the time Ethan Vale settled behind his polished desk. The office lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across shelves lined with awards and framed deals. Outside, skyscrapers blinked with fading lights as the world prepared for sleep. But Ethan wasn't ready to leave. He clicked the trackpad, and the interview footage filled his screen. There she was, Riley Morgan, the woman from the rainstorm, though at the time he hadn't connected the drenched Good Samaritan with the cautious applicant in that chair. Now he watched her face in close-up, the tremor in her lip when they asked about the conviction, the raw pause before she spoke. She hadn't tried to dodge it. She hadn't lied. Ethan leaned back, folding his arms as her voice filled the room, quiet and resolute. I stole from my employer. I was desperate. I was wrong. I served my time. He froze the frame on her eyes, wide and unguarded, searching for judgment or mercy. He let out a slow breath. On his desk lay her file, thick with legal printouts and court records. He opened it. The mugshot was clipped to the first page. She was younger there, pale and gaunt, hair pulled back harshly. The expression haunted him. A kid who'd ruined her future in one bad decision. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. He'd read these files before, for other candidates with spotless records. They never made him feel anything. This one felt different. He turned to the details. The stolen amount wasn't astronomical. Enough to keep her from being evicted. Enough for someone without options to see it as a way out. But the law hadn't cared. Conviction. Sentence served. Probation. Release. He closed the folder, but didn't put it away. He remembered the rain. The moment she'd offered him her last dollar for a sandwich. No hesitation. No expectation. He hadn't even had the chance to thank her properly. He rubbed at his jaw, restless. Most CEOs would have closed the file and moved on. Black mark on a resume, red flag for HR. Not worth the risk. But Ethan kept the folder open in front of him. He watched the video again. He didn't see a con artist. He saw someone who owned her failure, even when it cost her the job she so clearly needed. He opened his laptop and began to type notes. Keywords. Ideas. Second chance. Redemption. Potential. He wasn't sure yet what he would do. He knew the board wouldn't like it. He could already hear the objections about liability and public image. But he also knew the look in Riley's eyes when she confessed. The same look he'd seen in the rain when she refused to let someone go hungry, even if she had nothing herself. He leaned back, letting the silence of the office settle around him. He wasn't the kind of man who made decisions lightly. But he wasn't the kind of man who turned away from something real, either. The narrator's voice drifts in, firm and reflective. Most CEOs would have closed the file and moved on. Ethan Vale did something different. He didn't see a liability. He saw a chance to do what so many claimed to believe in, but so few actually did. Give someone the opportunity to be better than their worst mistake. Outside the window, the city slept on, unaware that somewhere in its quiet heart, a decision was being made that would change two lives forever. Morning light streamed through Vale Corp's sleek conference room windows, striking the polished table where executives sat in crisp suits, waiting. Their expressions were guarded, expectant, some bored, others wary. Ethan Vale stood at the head of the room, posture straight, eyes scanning the faces of people paid to question every risk. Behind him, the screen glowed with two stark words, Second Chance Initiative. He paused, letting the silence press in, then spoke evenly. I want to talk about what we stand for, he began. His voice carried in the cavernous space, unhurried, deliberate. A few exchanged skeptical glances. Ethan continued. Everyone here knows how we screen candidates. How many we reject without a second thought. We say we want the best. But do we mean the best resume? Or the best potential? He clicked the remote. The screen shifted to a photo, not Riley's mugshot, but a generic image of someone filling out a job application. There's someone I met recently, Ethan said. He kept her name private, her details vague enough to protect her. She sat in our interview room last week. She told the truth about a conviction. She admitted it without flinching. No excuses. She told us how she ruined her own life for a quick escape, how she paid for it, and how she's been fighting to stay on track ever since. A cough sounded at the table's end. One executive leaned back, arms crossed. Another tapped a pen, eyes narrowing. Ethan met their stares without blinking. I know what you're thinking. Liability, image, risk. But let's talk about reward. What message do we send if we refuse to hire people who've served their time, admitted their mistake, and want to do better? We talk about ethics, community, responsibility. This is what it looks like. The room was quiet except for the hum of the projector. He clicked again. The slide faded to white letters. Do we judge by worst day? He read it aloud, then added, or by the days they fight to be better. Someone cleared their throat, uncomfortable. A murmur rippled. Let's not pretend it's easy, Ethan said, voice sharpening. It's not. Some will fail us, but some will surprise us. They'll work harder than anyone because they know what it means to lose everything. I want us to be the company that gives them that shot. He paced slowly. This isn't charity. It's smart. It's loyalty. It's tapping into people who've been written off everywhere else. And it's the right thing to do. Another executive spoke up, voice cool. And our investors? Our image. Ethan turned. Our image. He let the words hang. I'd like it to be that we do more than talk about values. We act on them. Silence followed. A chair creaked as someone shifted. Ethan didn't flinch. This is company policy going forward, he said finally, voice unwavering. We will create the Second Chance Initiative. Background checks won't be the end of the story. They'll be the start of a conversation. A few faces showed grudging respect. Others remained doubtful. But no one interrupted again. The meeting adjourned slowly, executives filing out in thoughtful silence, some already on their phones, muttering about logistics and PR. Ethan remained at the head of the table, watching them go. He let out a breath, the tension easing only slightly. The narrator's voice returns, calm but resolute. He knew the risk, knew the cost to his reputation. But Ethan Vale was done letting fear dictate principle. That day, he chose to lead. Monday arrived with an early gray light spilling over the city, the sidewalks glistening from a night of rain. Riley Morgan stood outside Vale Corp's vast glass facade, her reflection wavering in the doors. She straightened her second-hand blazer, fingers brushing the new company badge pinned to her lapel. It was more than an ID. It felt like proof she'd been given a chance to start over. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet efficiency. Riley exhaled, then stepped through. She kept her shoulders squared, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. An HR representative met her with a professional nod. "Welcome, Riley. Let's get you oriented." They moved through pristine hallways lined with modern art and polished floors that seemed to magnify every footfall. Riley followed, clutching the small stack of onboarding papers like a shield. Open office spaces brimmed with busy employees, phones ringing, hushed meetings at glass-walled conference rooms. She caught glimpses of curious faces that turned politely neutral as she passed. The HR rep pointed out departments, exits, break areas. Riley tried to memorize everything while her heart thundered. It felt like too much. It was all she'd wanted. "Here's your desk," the HR rep said finally. It was small but tidy, a computer already set up, a new email account, a calendar waiting to be filled with deadlines she was determined to meet. "Any questions?" Riley shook her head. "No, thank you." She settled in slowly, placing a battered notebook next to the keyboard, arranging pens. She smoothed her hair and took a deep breath. This wasn't a cell or the cramped corner of a diner where she'd once washed dishes for cash. This was hers. Nearby colleagues offered tentative smiles. One nodded politely before turning back to their screen. Another gave her a quick hey without waiting for a reply. The caution was clear. They knew, or they suspected. She forced a small smile anyway, determined not to shrink. She powered on the computer. Notifications pinged, each new assignment laid out in stark, businesslike terms. Then a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Ethan Vale standing there. Unlike the executives in their perfect suits, he wasn't trying to intimidate or impress. He just looked at her with a calm, steady gaze. "Welcome aboard," he said simply. Her throat tightened. She tried to answer, but all she managed was a nod and a whispered, "Thank you." He smiled, just enough to ease the stiffness in her spine, and left her to her work. That moment stayed with her the rest of the day. Riley turned her focus to every task with unwavering attention. She proofread reports twice. She triple-checked data entries. She accepted feedback without flinching, scribbling down notes. At lunch, she sat alone at first, but by afternoon a colleague hesitantly asked if she needed help with the new workflow. She accepted gratefully, explaining she was catching up fast. By day's end, she even earned a quiet good work from someone who hadn't looked at her all morning. As the office lights dimmed and people packed up, Riley sat for an extra moment, fingers resting on the keyboard. She felt drained to the bone, but for the first time in years, it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from building something real. The narrator's voice closes in gently, almost like a promise. For the first time in years, Riley dared to hope. And in that hope, she began to reclaim the life she thought she'd lost forever. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving only the hum of distant elevators and the occasional groan of settling beams. Fluorescent lights were dimmed to a pale glow, casting long shadows across rows of empty desks. At one corner, a single lamp burned steadily over scattered spreadsheets and an open laptop. Riley sat slumped forward, hair falling from its neat clip. Her eyes blinked heavily at numbers that had long stopped making sense. The glow of the screen reflected on tired features, illuminating determination slowly crumbling under exhaustion. She tried to focus, correcting a cell in the spreadsheet, but her fingers faltered. The silence pressed in until it felt heavy on her shoulders. Finally, her eyelids gave up the fight. Her head lowered onto her folded arms, breath evening out, papers rustling gently with each shift. Down the hall, the soft click of shoes broke the quiet. Ethan Vale was making his nightly rounds, checking that everything was secure before leaving. He paused at the glow spilling from her desk. He stood in the doorway a moment, taking her in. She looked small there, surrounded by charts and half-finished reports, lines of code, and numbers reflecting a mind desperate to prove itself. A faint shiver ran through her even in sleep. Ethan's jaw tightened. He remembered every argument he'd had with the board, every raised eyebrow when he insisted on this new policy. He remembered the caution in HR's voice, the skepticism in finance. And here she was asleep at her desk, proving them wrong the only way she knew how. He stepped in, slow and quiet, careful not to wake her. He shrugged off his suit coat, hesitating for a moment. Then he gently draped it over her shoulders. She stirred but didn't wake. Next, he walked to the break room. The tea kettle whined low as it boiled, and he waited patiently, watching the water swirl. He returned with a cup, steam curling lazily. He set it beside her hand, where would be the first thing she saw when she woke. Finally, he pulled up a chair a few feet away and sat, elbows resting on his knees. For a long time, he just watched her breathe. This wasn't the boardroom or the polished lobby where power played out in words and handshakes. It was a quiet, vulnerable moment between two people who had once met in the rain without truly seeing each other. He thought of that dollar bill she'd pressed into his hand, the confusion on her face when she'd seen him at her interview, the stubborn way she kept coming back each day, working twice as hard as anyone else. She shifted, waking with a start, blinking blearily at the unfamiliar coat. Her eyes darted to him in confusion, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I must have, she stammered. Ethan held up a hand gently. You should rest, he said. His voice was calm, even warm. She froze, eyes locking onto his. The harsh glow of the desk lamp softened the lines of worry on her face. In that single, unguarded moment, the office wasn't a battleground of expectations and reputations. It was simply a place where someone cared enough to see her. The narrator's voice settles in softly, almost like a secret revealed. In that moment, kindness blurred into something deeper, and two people who thought they knew themselves realized how much more there was to discover. Dawn spread a pale glow across the city, brushing towers and streets with streaks of gold. The Vale Corp rooftop felt quiet, high above the noise, bathed in that gentle light that promised a new day. Ethan Vale stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, the wind tugging at his tie. His eyes stayed on the horizon, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He heard the door open behind him. Riley stepped out slowly, wary but curious. She dressed with care, hair pulled back neatly, though wisps had escaped to frame her face in the breeze. She hesitated, waiting for a signal it was safe to come closer. Ethan turned, relief and anxiety warring in his expression. For a moment, neither spoke. The city stretched endlessly below them, unaware of the weight that sat between these two people. Finally, he took a step forward. His voice was low, raw with the honesty he'd kept locked away. That day in the rain, he began, you didn't just help me stand up. You didn't just save me from a fall. You saved me from myself. Riley swallowed hard. Her eyes shone in the growing light. Filling with tears she refused to let fall. I didn't think I deserved anything good, she whispered. Her voice cracked, betraying the truth she'd carried for too long. Ethan reached out, closing the space between them. He took her hand carefully, as if it were something fragile and precious. She tried to pull away at first, reflex born from years of disappointment, but he held firm. You deserve everything, he said. No performance, no corporate polish, just the promise of someone who had seen all her broken pieces and wanted them anyway. She shuddered once, the tears finally slipping free. She didn't try to hide them. He brushed them from her cheek with a thumb, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The wind picked up, tugging at their clothes and hair, but neither noticed. In the hush between them, the noise of the world fell away. She leaned in first, pressing her lips to his gently, hesitantly, as if testing whether it was real. He kissed her back with quiet certainty. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was the promise of something built to last. When they parted, they both laughed softly, embarrassed and relieved at once. The rooftop was bathed in gold now, the city below beginning to stir, but for a moment it felt like they were the only two people awake. He squeezed her hand, leading her back toward the door. She didn't resist. The scene shifted to Vale Corp's lobby, where employees arrived in a blur of motion and chatter. But silence fell as Ethan and Riley appeared together, hand in hand. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Some faces showed surprise. Others smiled knowingly. A few simply nodded, recognizing something genuine and unspoken passing between their CEO and the newest hire. Riley met their eyes. This time she didn't look down. She stood straighter, hand held tight in Ethan's, the badge on her chest shining under the lobby lights. Together they walked forward, past glass walls and polished floors, leaving behind whispers and smiles, the promise of second chances turning into something real. The narrator closes the story in a calm, steady voice. They stepped into a future not defined by their past mistakes, but by hope. And in that hope, they found the courage to begin again. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you think about Riley and Ethan's journey. Did their second chance inspire you? How did you feel about Riley's courage and Ethan's decision to see beyond her past? We'd love to hear your reflections on their new beginning. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. So don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated on every new release.